Yeah,
from a person who's primarily in North America. We are expanding in Europe, but I think a lot of people, at least in North America, that are also looking to Europe. Um, what's the state of the market in the U.S.? We have complexities. When I talk to Europeans, they sometimes think, "Oh man, it's just Katie bar the door. Everybody go 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 go." That's not true. We have community groups we have to work in partnership with. We've got to find power, and the regulatory and business requirements have to all fit. Like it's the easy places have all been settled. Those are
yeah,
done. This is now the intermediate to the difficult, and so it seems to me, and so as a U.S. person looking at Europe, um, as I said before, one of the things that in my mind can get complicated is I think of Europe as if it's the U.S., and it is not. You walked me through. It's the EU, and then you have EU, Nordic, Eastern, and UK. So these are sort of the layers of whatever. And then even within those countries, Spain, for example, has a way that they do things in the greater Madrid area, the way that they would do things up in the greater Barcelona area or Zaragoza or whatever. So there are these nuances that probably aren't dissimilar to the U.S., but I think a lot of us are surprised when we hear them because we just think it's one big,
yeah.
entity.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think it's the same both ways. When
Yeah,
people look at the States,
yeah,
they see Loudoun County and go, "Oh, that's where all the data centers are. They're in
right,
Loudoun County. That's the Silicon Valley. That's the tech hub."
right,
But the reality is, you've got Austin came up as a tech hub, Boston's arriving as a mini tech hub. You've got Denver, so it's not one place, and you get the same in Europe. The difference in Europe is, and I think it was somebody years ago told me this story. He said, imagine you're a pig farmer in Minnesota and you
mm,
drive down to the Keys. You will stop on the way and you'll have McDonald's and everybody will be speaking English and you'll drive on the same side of the road and you'll fill up with gas at the gas station and use the same currency. If you're a pig farmer in northern Scotland and you drive down to the southern tip of Italy, you go through multiple different countries, you swap sides of the roads you drive on, there's different languages and there's different driving laws and different regulations, and it's, not the same journey as when you do it in the States. And I think that's the main difference is Europe is one big mass and most of it speaks English at the professional level, but you get
right,
out of the cities and you don't find English as a first language. It's, they'll look at you blank.
yeah,
So unless you can speak their language, it's very, very much a collection of cultures and ways of doing things. Now, you're still going to get the McDonald's all the way down because they're
sure,
everywhere,
right,
but you probably don't get the Starbucks coffee everywhere because in Italy, they probably look at coffee in a different way. And in
right,
France, they've got a different. So I think that's the main way I look at the difference between the two, is it's just culturally, Europe is so diverse, whereas the US has got a much more common, stronger core that drives it. It's still got lots of differences in the States,
hmm,
but not quite the same as a national distance between France and Germany, for example.
yeah. I would agree. I think the states regularly, the degree of differences would be like the degree of differences from Southern England to Northern England or
Yeah,
something like that. In Europe, it tends to be much more compact. Like it surprises me if I just from South London to North London, there are accent differences, there's behavioral differences, there's football club differences. And we
oh
have
yes.
some of that, for example, but it would be the difference between Philadelphia and New York City. These are different states, they're different big, I it's curious, but I think you're exactly right. I know you're exactly right. It it just still surprises because I travel around the United States so much from coast to coast. I don't usually see all the things that I have in common. I see the nuances. So if I'm not careful, I can get fooled into thinking, well, this is all about the differences. And really, it's not. 90% of it is the same. how I fuel up my vehicle, what vehicles I expect to see on the road, how we're exchanging money, all of these things. You're right. With that as a backdrop, how do you, I've been to Europe for data centers a couple times now, or the Netherlands, Ireland, and Spain. But a lot of people that are coming from the United States, and whether they're attending events or they're developing teams over there, they're trying to understand with all of that new nuance, like what's the big picture? So how would you describe, if you can, if we start up at the highest level with the quote unquote Europe, whatever that
Mhm.
means to you, how would you describe the current state of data center market and how is it evolving? That's as interesting to me as anything compared to, let's say, the United States. I would say Asia, but I think that's maybe a conversation for another
Yeah,
day.
that's. I think Asia's a more complex
Okay.
discussion, but certainly when you look at Europe, the one thing that, and this really came probably to the fore since the current administration got in
Mm,
and started introducing tariffs and various other things that have gone on. Europe suddenly woke up to the fact that it hasn't got of its own a sovereign data center capability. Most of the data centers are US owned.
mm,
So they're mostly US entities that have come over to Europe and invested and built data centers in Europe, across Europe. And then all of a sudden they've woken up to the fact that um, if sort of the leaders of the three leading hyperscalers got a message from the White House saying cut off access to this technology to Europe,
mhm,
Europe would be a wasteland. It would
mm,
not have much technology to be able to run itself. And it's become, shall we say, overly reliant on US providers. So one of the big things in Europe now is to balance that out. It's never going to sort of ditch the
mm,
US investments, and it's not going to go away from that. I think it's the realism is that while there is a threat that could potentially happen, it's not likely to. But that's woken Europe up to the fact that actually we need to have something to do more and support ourselves more. And that's caused Europe to look at the data center market. And historically, whether it's the UK, whether it's Italy, whether it's Spain, whether it's France or Germany, the bureaucracy of building data centers was immense. You're
mm,
talking 5, 6, 7 years to go through the planning cycle to get approval to build these data centers that can then be go looking for the power to power them up to sort of operate. And in the current AI wave where things are changing so rapidly and the demand is growing so great, it was a realization that yes, there's a power challenge that we've got, but we've also got the bureaucracy of what we're doing to stop the development. And how can we sort of free that up? And how can we also encourage more local European owners to sort of partner and provide capabilities in Europe? So at a high level, what you've got is a lot of investment going into the Nordics because obviously the Nordics has sorted out its planning bureaucracy
mm,
earlier. It's got access to a lot of renewable energy. It's also cooler, so its ambient temperature is lower, and therefore you can build, gigawatt data centers for the AI era in the Nordics, and it's very close to Europe, so you can connect it in, and everybody in Europe can use it. The problem with that is Europe is a collection of individual countries, as well as being 27 of them being in the EU. So well, the EU has, it's a bit like the federal government in the US, where it's got some control and governance. Each individual country has its own. So
Hmm.
each individual state has its own rules and regulations. So what you've got in Europe is the fact that the Germans would much prefer to have the data centers built in Germany to run their AI training and build their models in Germany rather than go to Norway to do it.
Yeah.
Now that makes it more sovereign than going to the US West or East Coast to do it, but it's still not meeting the full requirements of being, well, this is German owned, German run, German IP. And I think that's what Europe is struggling with now. It's trying to get its data center market um, much slicker. So you can not only build the data centers faster, they're going through the planning process. It's also looking at its aging grid system. So it can actually plan out your gates to the grid so you can actually get power to them. And it's looking at alternatives as we shut down the carbon generated electricity and go to carbon free electricity of what it can do and how it can do it. Now, the only country in Europe that really has got the power question completely bolted down is France, because they're about 80 to 90% nuclear power.
Mm-hmm.
So they're fine. You know,
Hmm.
they've got the power. That's good for them. But the rest
Hmm.
of Europe does not. And it's got an aging infrastructure in terms of the grid systems. So, for example, I was talking to a data center operator in Germany earlier this year, and they were saying, they've just installed a big data center in Berlin. They wanted to build one in Frankfurt, but there was no power in Frankfurt. The closest they could get was power was something like about 10 miles further out, which is another grid provider. That didn't meet their need. But because of the planning and the regulations and everything, if they wanted that, they had to start it. And then in 7 years' time, they'd get the planning and they'd be able to build it. And the market will have moved on tremendously since then. So I think that to me is the one big thing you can look at Europe and go, it's finally woken up to the fact that regulation is good, but maybe they've got too much regulation in certain spaces that's holding back the development of the sector and allowing it to grow, particularly with a homegrown emphasis. So allowing sort of German companies to build and own and partner with US companies to run data centers.
Yeah. There's a lot there, so much to unpack. I think what you're talking about is this idea you introduced me to called jurisdictional control. Is that what this is? Yeah.
Yes, it's the fact that, and I think someone said it, and I can't remember what the quote was exactly, is that if you don't have full control over your data,
Yeah.
then it's not sovereign.
That's right.
Because there was a statement that said, imagine you are a customer in France. Microsoft has just built a new data center in France. You put your data in Microsoft's data center. You are sharing control of that data with Microsoft.
Hmm.
You're also sharing control of that data with the French government and the French intelligence agencies. And you're also sharing it with the US government. So it's your data, you control it, but by putting it into that cloud, you are sharing that data with multiple other people who aren't the owners of that data. You
Hmm.
may not want them to see that data, control that data, but the reality of the world is that you have to. So sovereignty, full jurisdictional control would be the scope of who has access to that is restricted to the country. You're never
Hmm.
going to get away from the fact that governments have access to stuff. If they're
Hmm.
going to give you permission to do something, they're probably going to have access to it. So,
Hmm.
if it was a OVH cloud, for example, you put your data in, then you'd share it with OVH cloud, who'd have to share it with the French government and the French intelligence services, but wouldn't have to share it with anybody else outside of that. So it's
Hmm.
about where do you draw the lines in that jurisdictional control, and what data are you concerned about with that jurisdictional control? Because some of the data, you're not bothered about whether that data is, shared with other people because it may not be anything of any importance.
Right.
But health records, criminal records, and stuff like that, that's something that people consider to be very sensitive. You
Hmm.
know, do they want that information? If a third country wants to see a criminal record from an individual, then there is diplomatic ways where they can go, is this person got a criminal record? And get that information rather than having access to it themselves and just looking at it and using it in their own way. So I think that's what Europe is now struggling with. And it's not just Europe, to be fair. If you go out to the Middle East and you go out to other countries, they're also now realizing that, you know, data and access to data um, is something that, particularly in the AI era, is valuable. Because if
Hmm.
you look at what ChatGPT and the like have been done, is they've been trained on data they harvested from the internet,
Hmm.
which for the most part is rubbish. They've gone out there and they've harvested everything they could that's on the internet that's freely accessible and trained this model. The valuable data is company data sat
Hmm.
behind those firewalls on those servers in that data center. That data is it's clean data for the most part. It's validated, you know, it's not got many errors in it, and it's trusted and trustworthy data. Now, that data in an AI era is what people want to train models on to
Hmm.
make them usable. And if they can access that data by just the fact that you've put it into a cloud and that cloud happens to be a US owned cloud, then hey presto, you've lost any sort of commercial sort of edge that you were going to get from doing that because somebody else has already got it. So
Hmm.
that's why you're seeing this focus on the sovereignty, particularly with AI, on data that people consider to be sensitive or valuable. If it's cat videos, then nobody's interested. Yeah, you can share your cat videos with anybody and train your model on cat videos all over the world and see if cat videos are the same in Germany, France, Indonesia, or wherever. But patient records, that's something that you want to do and train on data in the country that is for your citizens and your citizens only to show,
Hmm.
what your cancer survival rates are like and what the sort of uh, access to sort of health here and there is like. So these are all the aspects that people are struggling with when it comes to data centers being built, being owned and being operated. And it's now spawning this sort of growth of sovereign clouds being presented. So you've got American companies, and you've got AWS with its European sovereign cloud and Oracle with its EU sovereign cloud that have created a completely separate cloud based on European data centers, staffed, managed, operated, and run by European citizens, air gapped from the US owners.
Hmm.
So that's one example. Google have gone down a different route where it's partnered with um, Thales in France. So it basically hands over its sort of Google distributed cloud software and hardware to Thales. They authenticate it, they validate it, they install it, and then they run it as a sovereign cloud in France that is based on Google technology, but Google is air gapped from touching it. And you're
Hmm.
seeing a lot of data center operators now look at this as going, how can we meet the jurisdictional regulational controls? Um, what what solutions can do that? And that's going to be very dependent on each country, on each country's rules and regulations. And that's why you're seeing so many different approaches. Because Secnum Cloud in France, for example, ownership of the assets is a part of being sovereign. So that's not something that you have in Germany. They don't have the under C5. They don't have ownership of the assets, but the data and access to it has to be controlled in a different way. So
Mm.
that's one of the big differences that US companies coming into Europe will see is it is a collection of countries that have got rules, regulations of their own. There's an overarching for 27 of them EU one, but the EU one tends not to be the more strict version. It's, if you like, the introductory level, and then each country will have their own specific ones. So it's got to meet the EU one, but there's also deeper ones in different countries. And depending on what they want to do and how they want to look garner the investment depends on how strict those rules and regulations are. But for these in the EU, they can't be weaker than the EU regulations. Now, the
Yeah.
UK is not in the EU anymore. We left, so we can do our own thing. Some of the Nordics are not in the EU. They can do their own thing. So it's quite complex when it comes to the trading relationships and how
Mhm.
stuff can sort of be done as well. So, we're not talking of a simple sort of model here. If you're coming into Europe, you're coming into something that's bureaucratic, got lots of differences, got lots of different challenges, but a absolutely massive amount of opportunity if you can do it in the right way and put those data centers in the right place with the right controls and ownership and jurisdictional controls and management of them that can deliver what they need to deliver in that country at that time.
I gotta believe it's possible because they do Oktoberfest over the entire continent, so they can rally around big ideas. Um, Gosh, I I promised myself not to rabbit trail too much, so I'm going to try to keep this without going super deep. But let me ask you this: one of the things that you said there, and I wrote on my little notepad here. Well, first, I don't know, at least from a U.S. perspective, and maybe this isn't fair, but I would just say I would see the point that you're making about data sovereignty. First of all, it is real. Even in the States, it's do I want the government data of Arkansas to live in Missouri or do I want it to live in Arkansas? And is there, like, how do I differentiate that? And not for espionage reasons, but for funding reasons. If I'm funding out of a budget in Arkansas to deliver, to have goods and services provided, do I want it or whatever? Pick your states, right? So
Yeah,
those are real conversations that are happening now. Maybe some of them for uh, risk reasons or whatever. But I think it's less about a threat and it's more about a risk. I do agree whether it's whatever administration is around. This has been a conversation to some degree I've heard for a while, which is if we don't have control or if we don't own it, we don't have control. At least that's what it feels like. When you said earlier, let's just take the EU for example, and I am building. I've some clouds are being built, and there's clouds that are under U.S. in a U.S. umbrella, whatever that regulation looks like. And there are other clouds being deployed that are demised from the U.S. or China or some other, right? They are their own cloud that is subservient to the EU rule of law. In that example, I guess, is I'm thinking through like the barriers to entry to build your own. We'll come back to power in a minute, but just, at speed and scale, is there, can a nation on the continent partner in a real way to build a data center in their neighboring country because they're under the EU umbrella? Or is it just that much more fractured that it's got to be, one of the 27 for one of the 27, the Netherlands, Belgium, whatever, Italy, it cannot partner. It can't have the Irish come in and help them build and operate something, even though they have all of this experience, because it's just got to be for this. And I wonder what you gain or lose with that level of restriction if the EU umbrella isn't enough.
It's not, yeah, it's not quite as bad as that. I probably painted it a bit worse than it is. It's
Well,
down to,
we need people to listen in. So start off
yeah.
with the Big Bang. That's okay.
What the Big Bang is that it is the big countries that have those restrictions. So
Uh,
the French, the Germans, and the Brits. The
okay.
three of us, you know, all have our own definite needs requirements. And even
Okay.
when we were in the EU, we had those. So those
Mhm.
take precedent. The smaller countries in Europe tend not to be quite so um, focused on it. So
Mm,
Ireland, for example, is a classic example. It's in the EU, so it serves the EU. It has become, like the Netherlands, a hub for data centers
mhm,
because Ireland speaks English.
mhm,
They're on that transatlantic pipe,
mhm.
and you know, Americans coming to islands from particularly from the East Coast, it's like coming home. So there's a lot of Irish Americans. So Ireland was chosen very much because of its cultural fit, even though
Mhm.
it's a part of the EU. So data centers built there can serve all of Europe. They just can't serve the sovereign part of Germany. That
Gotcha.
has to be done in Germany or in France. The Netherlands, are similarly a small country, but ideally placed on that fiber cable and has built up a reputation for being, quite nice and neutral. So
Mhm.
a bit like Ireland, you go there and it can serve most countries across Europe with data center capacity. The only thing it can't do is the deep sovereign stuff.
Sure.
So, I mean, if you go to Switzerland, the Swiss banking rules, even though they're not in the EU, are so tight that everything has to be in Switzerland.
Right.
You can't do the Swiss banks can't use anything that's not in Switzerland. So data centers built in Switzerland, operated in Switzerland, controlled by Swiss companies.
Mhm.
That's Swiss banking. So you've got the little nuances like that that pop up in different places. And then you've got sort of like the developing part of Europe, the Eastern European and the Southern European parts that aren't as mature as the French and the Germans and the Brits in terms of their, you know, uh, economies aren't quite as big and want to use the technology to grow and become more technically advanced. So
Mm,
they tend to be looking for data centers to be built in those countries that can help them keep people in their country. Because um, a lot of Eastern European sort of people with skills will move to either the US, France, Germany, the UK, because the well-paid jobs are there, particularly in the tech sector. So
right.
they tend to sort of leave, Poland, Bulgaria, and Romania and places like that. So
Czechoslovakia,
the
I've heard.
yeah,
Yeah.
so all of the countries there, they've got a pool of skills that are being sucked out because they don't have the opportunity in those countries to feed those skills. So with cloud and AI and sovereignty, they can sort of almost say, well, if we've got a data center being built in Prague, that data center in Prague is going to offer jobs to people in Prague. So graduates coming out of the university can get jobs, can train on it, can operate on it, and we can build up the skills and retain them in the country. Now, you're
Hmm.
not losing everybody all the time, but that's what's going on in the Middle East. The Middle East is another example of where they're moving from the economy is heavily based on oil and they want to build a new economy and they see technology and AI in particular as the way to do it. So they are using regulation to get people to build data centers, invest in their country so they can have the skills in that country.
Hmm.
Now, they're probably less concerned by the jurisdictional control aspect because they're more interested in getting the investment. And that's the balance that you see all around the world is, how much do you want the investment in the country to build the data centers, and how much do you want that jurisdictional control? And that's the challenge for operators going into these countries.
Mm,
Because you can go into one country and it'll be you can build it, here's the regulations, you can operate it, but you've just got to staff it with our people and train our people. Whereas in another country, it might build, you can build it, but we operate it and you're at arm's length. You
Hmm.
have no say on it because it's completely sovereign to us,
Hmm.
but we're paying you for the privilege of doing it. So depending on where you go, you're going to come across different challenges like that. And I think
Hmm.
for an operator, because let's be honest, apart from Eastern Europe, the Chinese do not get into Western Europe.
Hmm.
Just like North America, you would not find Huawei, Alibaba, Baidu building data centers and having customers in North America. You've got none of those in Western Europe either.
Right.
So, pretty much the NATO type alliance looks at that and treats the Chinese not as someone that they want in Eastern Europe and some of Southern Europe slightly different. They'll invest them in. So for
Hmm.
most of Europe, you are the US providers are just looking at what degree of sovereignty is this needed to build and serve what I want to serve here?
Hmm.
Is there a market for, you know, totally sovereign, hands off, it's yours? Or is it there is a market for building something that can operate across Europe? It doesn't have to be country specific. And I think
Hmm.
that's where the opportunity lies. It's spotting the market and opportunities where the European regulations provide sufficient guidance and control for something to be done in each country, any country, and then you could pick the right, most relevant country where there is access to the power and the land and the people to build it. And I think that's the trick.
Hmm.
It's not an easy one, but that's the trick. If you can spot that, you can build it. But as we've seen in the past, power is another issue because Ireland was out of power at one point. The Netherlands was out of power at one point. You couldn't build a data center in the Netherlands because there was no power available. Same with Ireland. I think both of those have now got more power, so you can build data centers there. Countries like Spain and Portugal are, shall we say, underrepresented in the data center business by comparison to France, Germany, and the UK. So by contrast, there is probably opportunities in Spain and Portugal to build data centers to get the power and to also serve the Latin American market, which the Spanish and the Portuguese have got a cultural fit to. So
Hmm.
Spain, you know, are seeing massive investments in the data center space in Spain. I think I can't remember if it was Microsoft or Oracle. One of them is investing 15 billion in in Spain over the next few years, just because they see the massive opportunity of the Spanish market and what the Spanish market can reach. So I think that's when you look at Europe from that point of view, it's identifying those key opportunities in those countries. The Netherlands and Ireland are always safe bets,
Hmm.
but they come with a lack of power. They're very crowded spaces. So skills, you may have to pay a premium to get the skills, because if you're going to build a data center, you're going to probably be poaching the skills from a competitor. So those are quite mature countries. You've got tight regulations in Germany and France that may preclude you from wanting to go in there because it's too timely, too costly to go through all that process. So then you're looking at, the Nordics, Spain, Italy, and other countries that may represent a better opportunity for you to go into and offer the data centers to do the business that will actually sort of enable you to grow and grow in a way that can transport you across other parts of Europe.
In some ways, this is just like the United States as you're talking. I'm like, there are states in the United States that are erecting great barriers. They're not just infrastructure barriers. I don't want to say they're artificial because they're important to the people, but the legislatures are not eager to make changes. And let's be clear, like you and I would not go into a home or as you would say in England, a lift, we would say an elevator here without
Yeah.
regulation. It's the kind of things that say, look, your wagon wheels must be 9 spokes and they have to be wooden. Well, hold on. We're using hovercraft now. Nobody, can we update it to say that the sidewalks aren't 4 feet wide anymore. They're 12 feet wide or whatever they are. These are the common sense. There's things that need to be cleared off, things that were put on to protect a particular business entity that's been gone for 50 years. And so it doesn't make any logical sense and they just got to be cleaned up. So that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about um, in the States anyway, there are a number of states that are saying, look, we're tired of our children going to our universities or going to our trade schools to learn how to do a trade or whatever, and they move away. It may just be the bigger city in that state. Whereas if you could bring a data center, whatever its size, we tend to build large data centers in my organization, but there are modular data centers, there's all kinds. And those data centers, usually that campus brings not only a job for it, but for every job or so it brings, according to the Data Center Coalition, I believe said this, it brings 5 to 6 or more.
Mm.
The new firefighters that need to be there, the life safety people, whatever it is, it brings this an economic base so that you can tax it, so that you can improve your community and the jobs within the data center, a few of which are IT, but many of which are not, and all the things surrounding that property. But then it populates and perpetuates these other things. Some communities embrace that, some don't, for whatever reasons fit their nation state or their state in the US or whatever. But we see this. The other thing when you're talking about people, I love this idea. They would move away for some period of time. Many times what we've learned is they'll come back, but they're not the same tax bases. Like the country loves its citizens, but it also wants to tax its citizens in a fair
Yeah.
way from their mid-20s to their mid-60s before they then enter the retirement role, right? That's how our language thrives. That's how our services thrive. That's how our culture thrives, is that we are able to, upon the success of all of us, take a small sliver, at least this is the American way or hope, so that we can perpetuate these things. But if you're gone for that, not just idea generating and cultural maintaining, but revenue generating time, and you only come back when it's time to just, take advantage of the services, that is a great strain on the state. And so for all of these reasons, industry like ours, so that's a long preamble by me, but I guess my question is there twofold? One, is there an opportunity? Well, when we say sovereignty, so when we're talking about a data center to serve up a sovereign role, I wonder if that is the same as a data center that's just doing generic cloud. In other words, in the States, we identify regularly this data, even if it's in the cloud, is federal data or it's state sovereign data. And it has to go into either a data center for that purpose. So if it's United States federal, it can go into a federal data center that is owned by an individual operator, but it is only federal or similar customers in it. Or the state of Tennessee or the state of Georgia, where I'm at, may have a data center or data centers that are much more modest in size, but they're fully, so they can have their other data, in an Amazon cloud or Oracle cloud or whoever's cloud. It's secure, but it's not that sovereign IP that they're concerned about. So do you think that you'll see sort of an idea of there could be two, a small dedicated for this so that they can embrace the larger for just the generic? And the other side of that is in the same way that you have, I don't know, Mercedes-Benz has intellectual property in multiple countries, and they secure it. Like there's probably no formula at the Coca-Cola company or at Mercedes or whoever that doesn't live in somebody's data center somewhere. I wonder if there's an opportunity to bring your own micro data center into a space. So it's not one of mine or a Microsoft or whatever. It's yours that you deploy on your property that you own in another country or another locale. And all you're getting is power to it. Everything else you control. I wonder if there's an opportunity for that. There might be a reason why if I'm a Germany and I need it in the same way that I have a diplomatic presence in another state, can I have a data center in my embassy? Can I have a data center someplace else? I wonder if these are ways to help facilitate while they're evolving, because they're trying to catch up to a 20, 30-year industry quickly with regulatory constraints and with power constraints.
Well, I mean, interestingly, the embassy one it's something I found out last year. The state of Monaco is very small,
Right.
but it's got uh, so it's the data center that runs Monaco. Its backup is in its embassy in Luxembourg
Hmm.
because obviously it's so small that if a natural disaster hit Monaco, it didn't make any difference where your data center would be.
Right.
It would wipe it out because
Right.
it's a very small footprint. So
Right.
they've used an embassy in a third country like Luxembourg to say, right, that's our backup data center for Monaco. Now, with Monaco, you could do that.
Right.
You're not likely to be able to do that in the, in the embassies for the others. But I think to your point, yes, the the evolution of sovereignty is, and there is no single definition of sovereignty.
Mm.
It is um, a sliding scale, and you have to decide as the owner of that data what as what you need to meet the regulatory requirements you're being asked to meet. So where can that sit? What do I need it to do? And what we've seen with the data center providers over the recent years is they have come up with a raft of different offerings
Mm.
that can meet the needs. So you've got the cloud providers, the big hyperscalers with their big hyperscale businesses that have got massive amounts of data in it that are dotted everywhere.
Hmm.
And apart from the fact that you can say, I want my data to stay in this, region. I don't want it to go out of it. That's, it's data residency. So what you've
Hmm.
got there is you've got, okay, this is data that I do not want to go anywhere else. Who has access to it, how it's processed, I'm not bothered about. It's just the data can't leave the country.
Right.
You then move up to, you know, okay, I've got this data, but I want it to be processed also in the country in a way that complies with the rules and regulations of for that data. So it's a subset of that data has got to be done in this way. And then you move up to, you know, uh, the case where, well, I also want to make sure that that's full jurisdictional control over how I do that. So as you can see, there's layers of sovereignty.
Mm.
I think my model that I developed at Omdia is a 6-layer model. Uh, and and what you need to do as a customer and what the data center business needs to do is look at that and work out where the majority of workloads are going to sit under which one of those levels and what do those levels mean in these countries, and can, for the EU, for example, can I put a data center anywhere in the EU that's going to meet level 1, 2, and 3 and then attract customers all across the EU for that. Levels 4, 5, and 6, I'm going to have to do that differently. That's the trick. That's one of my projects for next year. And
Mm.
strangely enough, I was talking to a client in the Middle East that wants to have this almost maturity model of taking my layers of sovereignty and going, what does that mean given the regulations to an operator?
Hmm.
Because that's the key question. But to your point, yes, that is what we are going to get. We are going to get this because if you're dealing with any government military intelligence, that's all on premises for every government in the world based on their technology. Doesn't make
Yeah.
any difference who you are. You know, it is top secret. That's nobody else has access to it.
Right.
Apart from the US, with its federal government specific data centers, I think Oracle has built an offering for Australia and the UK government, but it's not quite the same. It's not a purpose-built data center that does nothing else but run federal business.
Mm.
So it's something that's here's your UK government cloud, and it can operate like this it's got these degrees of, security, encryption. It's got these degrees of data protection and privacy, and we can guarantee that. So the jurisdictional control is not given away, but there is sufficient countermeasures to it for the non-top secret workloads to be considered acceptable to governments.
Mm.
And then you get into the organizations that are paranoid with the advent of AI about their proprietary data getting out and being trained in a model and then becoming known to the world. Now, I was in Phoenix last year, and I was talking at a council for this vendor with their clients, and I was talking about AI factories. And it was more of I was leading the discussion than a presentation. And the room was split 50-50 between these customers. 50% of these, and most of them were North American customers, not European customers. 50% of them were going, no, our data is not going into any form of cloud to train AI models because I do not want my competitor knowing that I'm planning to build a widget with 6 holes here and 3 holes there so they can copy it. That's my proprietary data. That stays here. We train it on premises only. And the other 50% were going, yeah, but we can't afford to do that. So we're using the cloud to do it. And the two groups were basically arguing, so what about this data getting out then? Well, we can't afford to do it any other way. That's the reality of
Right.
what you've got. If you are a country like the UK, we've just opened a big data center in Bristol with 5,500 of these NVIDIA GPUs, Blackwell GPUs. God knows how many millions and billions of pounds it's cost to build. That's for doing AI research on the NHS.
Mm.
We're a fairly rich country. We can afford to do it. If you're Ethiopia, you've got no chance of doing that. So you may have the same, I don't want that data going out to anybody else, but you haven't got the same degree of flexibility to do it yourself. So you have to assume you're letting out. And that's the same with end user organizations. Those like Mercedes and Coca-Cola, I would say they are probably doing the lots of their really important stuff on AI, not in the cloud. They're doing it on premises, on their own data centers, because they do not want any data leakage. And they can't trust the mitigations that are in place, like the encryption or anything else. Other companies might go, I'm going to have to trust those mitigations because I haven't got the funds to do it. And I think that to me is if you're a data center operator, that's what you're looking at, is you're going, well, if I'm rich enough and paranoid enough about my data getting out there in the AI world, I'm going to go for something on premises. So I need to be something to be built where I am, under my control, so I own it and run it. If I'm not that paranoid, I've then got concerns over the security and the privacy. So it's to what level can you offer something that meets or mitigates those risks to the satisfaction of those customers to going, that's what I can afford to pay for. That is where I see the whole concept of AI sovereignty going, because you have got France, Germany, the UK building its own supercomputers to do that model training. And then you've got other countries going, we're going to have to do it in a different way. So we're going to need other things that protect the data as much as we can do. And I think, there isn't a single answer. And that's the really big point here is, this is not black and white. It's not, there's no right or wrong. Everything's a shade of gray. And it's what that shade of gray and where you sit on that scale you accept is. So going out with a data center and putting it into, Germany to service the whole of Europe, you might get 95% of the workload. You might get 80% of the workload based on what people think, but you're going to get a good proportion of the workload. If you stuck a data center in the UK to serve Europe, you'd probably get about 5% of the workload because we don't like us. Um, Now that's a different story. Um, but if you're in the Nordics, you're going to get what they have to give you because you can offer the service. That's the reality of where you are. It's sort of,
Right.
it's a bit like being in the States because I know in the States, if it's gambling, the compute for the gambling has to be in the state where the gambling is. It
Right.
can't be out of state. And but you're not going to get sort of collaboration between states that have got industries that are in competition with each other.
Yeah. One of
So
the differences, though, you're right, and this is a fascinating. Like I could just let you go, but I gotta. We got so much time. I got a couple more questions, but it's this. So let's talk about that for a second. In the States, you're right. There are certain loads, um, high frequency trading, gambling, certain uh, state or government things, but those are generally compared to the overwhelming amount of data in a data center, very small statistically, at least to my understanding. And so when we go around in the United States looking for play, unless we have a specific, a customer comes and says, I have this specific load. It could be a sovereign load for a federal government. And so there are just two or three places that that will fit there or something like that. So that aside, everything else, usually it is some combination of these things. Is power available? And what's that growth look like? Can connectivity be brought there? And I'm going to come back to those two things here in just a second. Um, what's the cost of the land? What's the business environment there? Does that state or community want us there? Are they eager for an opportunity, or are they fatigued by it? What's transportation and talent like? Like these, so these, the same five or seven things that have, for the emphasis moves over time, but it's always those sorts of things. Um, as it relates to connectivity and power, um, many times it's not even the generation or the peering point. It's getting the right of way to get that transmission to the location, or the right of way because so much of our conduit is full for what we call the middle mile. So some things are being built while they're very expensive, they're very lucrative to get from the East Coast to the West Coast or whatever. But to get from the northern Florida to the middle of Kentucky is harder. It's not, the model's different, the situation is different. So when you look at everything from Eastern Europe to the Nordics, Europe in between, and the UK sort of on the other bookend, how do developers look at that scenario? Because it's one of the things that's very attractive to us about Europe is they speak our language. A lot of the people that are consuming things there are consuming the same sort of very similar cultural things. Like the clouds, the things that they want are they're very similar. They're as similar, almost like Canada and Mexico. Like they're very, very similar to what we are doing and pursuing in the United States. So Europe's very interesting to us. With that said, does this process go through the same thing? I'm not talking about the sovereign things that we've been talking up to now. I'm just talking about the general data center, whether that's cloud-based or not. Are they pursuing those same spots where I've got that combination of things? And if they are, where are those things that are sort of the next 24, 36 months that people are like, ooh, this is really interesting. There's a real opportunity here.
yeah, you're right, because one of the big challenges in Europe has always been the bureaucracy of the planning process for building things.
Mm,
But the other challenge has been, aligned to that is the NIMBYs, not in my backyard people.
right,
You know, I don't want a data center built in my backyard. I don't want the power cables coming over in my backyard.
right.
That's held up deployment of industry and technology in Europe quite a lot because people have gone, no, we don't want that. It's a nice rural part of town. We do not want a great big warehouse with a data center in being built there. So a lot of what's been going on has been to sort of fast track the appeals process and the whole process of how, people can have their objections to it. It can be heard in a legal and legitimate way, but it doesn't take 7 years to do it. You
Hmm.
know, you can get an answer, and I think Sweden's cut it down now to 9 months. So you can get
Wow.
an answer on yes, that's going to be possible, or no in a period of time.
Hmm.
Because I mean, you look at any big infrastructure project, um, just slightly off topic, but Heathrow Airport's third runway, right? So Heathrow Airport is the busiest international airport in the world. I think Atlanta is the busiest airport in the world,
Hmm.
but most of that's national. Is national. It's business international airport in the world. It's got two runways. They've been talking about building a third runway for God knows how long. They finally got around to saying they are going to be doing it. It's going to be something like around 2050 when that runway finally gets built
We won't
and
have
is
planes.
operational. Yeah, it's ridiculous. We're looking at, I mean, and this is somebody said to me earlier this year, says, when you're looking at this, don't look at trying to solve the problem for today. You're trying to solve the problem for tomorrow. You
Hmm.
know, yeah, to your point, will we still want airports in
Hmm.
20 odd years' time? Probably, but probably not.
Hmm.
Will we still want fast trains? Probably not. We don't know, but
Right.
that's what you've got to think about the planning. And this is where it comes to the data centers is, you know, now data centers are massively in demand. People want to build them. So countries are looking at it, particularly in Europe, as right, if we're going to get into this, being able to get the investment to build them, we've got to make it easier for them to build them quicker.
Hmm.
But we don't want to give a carte blanche to being built everywhere. And all
Right.
right, you knock down the Tower of London, we can build a data center there. It's
Right.
perfect for it. You've got to have some protections and some control. So it's getting that balance of that right, which is one thing that they're looking at doing. And then you come on to the real problem of the power demand and the having the power in the right place. The grid systems across Europe are aging. They're 40, 50 years old.
Hmm.
Um, they are, not a bit like you described in America. You can get the power to one place, but getting it from that place to the next place, that can be damn near impossible
Hmm.
because you can't get it over or under in a cost-effective way.
Hmm.
I mean, just when Heathrow Airport had that fire in the substation earlier this year,
Hmm.
it knocked out Heathrow Airport for 24 hours. It took them that long to switch the power to another substation to feed it. The power was there. It's just the architecture of how Heathrow took its power and how they could transfer the power across from a substation that had a fire, burnt down. It wasn't the same as the data centers. Because if
Hmm.
you looked at that area around Heathrow, Heathrow's about 30 megawatts of power.
Hmm.
The data centers around Heathrow are more than 30 megawatts of power. They didn't flicker, they just continued. But the world's busiest international airport shut down for 24 hours
Right.
because nobody in that building the infrastructure of an airport had actually factored in the fact that, well, we might want to have power redundancy that can switch on and keep us running, instantaneously. It wasn't thought of when they built it because it was not on the minds of the builders. That's the thing when you're building these gigawatt data centers that people are talking about now is what do I need from them? What is going to be important for them? And cooling is one of the things that people don't often talk about. They talk about the power, but
Hmm.
how are you going to get the water to cool them?
Hmm.
The UK is on its fourth heat wave this year,
Hmm.
right? So the temperature here in the now, and my back is sweating, is in the mid 30s,
Hmm.
which I know I was talking to my colleague in Phoenix yesterday, and he said the
That's
temperature there was in the
6
mid,
a.m.
he was saying the temperature there was in the mid 40s, and we're going, it's hot enough here in the mid 30s, thank you very much. But that's the point, is that the UK is getting hotter. The UK is getting into its its reservoirs are 70% full,
Hmm.
whereas they would normally be 80% full. So water is an issue. So when you're building these data centers, it's not just the land and the power and the people, it's and have we got the ability to cool it?
Hmm.
With the climate change that's going on,
Hmm.
will the south of France, which is currently okay hot, but in 10 years' time, will that be too hot to cool and run a big data center? That's another aspect that people don't necessarily obviously think about when they started. But that's why the Nordics has been such
Right.
a popular place because they are further north, they are cooler. So people are knowing if we build stuff here, we've got longevity
Right.
because we've got access to natural resources, we've got access to renewable energy, and the temperature and the climate up here is not going to change that dramatically in 10 years. That's going to make it, a temperature of the mid 30s or the 40s.
In the States, we go through the same iteration. Um, I cannot think. I was just before this conversation we're having in a call with our internal teams. There's not a design that we've deployed in the last 5 years. It's not a water-free design. Like that's not what we do. And so there are legacy evaporative cooling, and I think pretty much, at least in the States, the industry has pivoted to closed loop cooling. There might be a variety of systems on how they do that, and there will be a little water to go to the bathroom or have a water fountain or something like that. But they've pivoted to that. The other area that we don't talk about regularly, and I'm not going to belabor it now, but it's just because the climate is changing, snow loads that we predicted in Chicago 20 years ago, now they have to recalculate because these some of these buildings are larger, but even the existing buildings in Chicago or Minneapolis or the Dakotas or that upper belt across the United States, you get wetter, heavier. The irony is, while it's warmer during the summer, it's wetter, and the precipitation, according to these people that are talking to us, are something they really have to consider. And so we're all pivoting. And then the last piece is all that climate change analytics is run in a data center. So you,
Yeah.
so you, so again, how much data is that your sovereign data? How much is just general scientific data? Where does it live? I don't want it near me, but I want complete sovereign control over what's happening. It's not for the faint of heart. It's not unsophisticated. I guess my question is, as you look at these things, you mentioned Sweden, looks like they're really getting serious about how do we give a go, no go, so we can move forward or not forward on projects. Are there other places? I happen to be at Data Center Dynamics in their Madrid conference earlier this year. Absolutely blew my mind. The eagerness, the excitement. I didn't know what I was going to expect. I'd been to a smaller data center conference in Ireland, which was a lot of fun. It had a different sort of flavor and focus. This one was what I would expect when I go to one of the big DCDs in New York and Virginia, I've been to and spoken at. It felt entrepreneurial, right? Like it felt like the people from Portugal, the people from Spain, people from other parts of Europe, people from the Middle East, excited,
Mm.
excited. The president of the district there where Zaragoza was came in and closed out the day that I keynoted, and they don't have it all figured out. That's not what they're trying to say, and they are. There's a lot of intermittent power people in solar and wind, but I saw conversations around collaboration. How do we firm that up? What loads do work? It wasn't we can't do big campuses or we can only do the energy around it was very pleasantly surprising because they see not just economic opportunity, but education opportunity, healthcare opportunity, crazy enough sustainability opportunity. Like those are the conversations that I just sort of move through. My schedule, other than speaking, was more open than it normally is. So I got to participate in a lot of side conversations. Is that normal across Europe? Is it just unique to that area? So as you think about this as developers like us that are looking at all of these areas, are there places that you think, whether they're there now, are pivoting to how do we embrace this? To our earlier discussion about we want an opportunity for our citizens, for ourselves, and then eventually for the broader EU that are really there's a lot of momentum and excitement around.
Well, I think you're right. This is something that I was in Brussels a few weeks ago, and this is what came out of Brussels was a recognition that across Europe, the there is a hunger to get data centers built to use them. The reality is that I mean, incidentally, we've sold a couple of places in Spain
Uh-huh.
recently. Um, and the bureaucracy in Spain is mind-blowingly paper-based. So it's absolutely archaic the way they do things. You have to have somebody go to an office and have a piece of paper actually stamped
Right.
and brought back. It's so I think there's a recognition that some of the old ways of doing things um, are causing problems.
Hmm.
So, the heritage of
Well, they're losing
how,
opportunity, right? I mean,
yeah,
that's at the end of the day, they're losing opportunity. And they want independence, to your point, but they're losing opportunity.
but I think Europe has recognized that, the countries have recognized that, and they're all trying to sort of change the way that they can attract this investment and the way that they can speed up and make it a less bureaucratic process. Because I think it's been the issue in sort of lots of countries in Europe, not just Spain. Spain's not on its own, you
Right.
know. The UK has a strange way of doing some stuff, but it's a little bit better. You don't have to go and get pieces of paper stamped. But the whole approach across Europe is recognized that this is something that, unless we adopt a smoother, faster way of doing it, the investment is not going to come, because they may say, right, the planning process for building data centers is absolutely streamlined now in Spain,
Hmm.
but the process for buying a house in Spain may still well be set in the 1880s, which means that you've got the data center. How the hell do you get people to buy, rent, and move there? So
Right.
culturally, you have to have everything right at the same time. So the legal system has to be at the same level. All of the other processes, the financing and everything else, all has to be aligned in terms of the levels of bureaucracy associated with it have to be minimized. So, an industry can come. And I think there's recognition of that. They're doing that. Is it there now? I don't follow it close enough to say it's done, but my gut reaction would be it's not there quite yet, but it's certainly worth having those discussions in Spain, Portugal, um, Italy, and then Eastern Europe, the Eastern European um, countries. There's a lot of interest out there. Um, they do have, and obviously the war in Ukraine is a big concern for a lot of people
Hmm.
investing there. So,
Hmm.
you go to Poland. Poland is a very big country. Um, they have, they want to get investment into Poland, but because they're right on Russia and the Ukraine's border, they are sort of somewhat in a very strange position, because they've got this, you know, well, how are people going to see investing in us? Are we Putin's next target? Should he want to come and march into another part of Europe? So I
Hmm.
think that's the issue that people have with parts of Eastern Europe. Whereas pre the Ukraine war, it was a very fertile space to get investment into for lots of industries. Lots of car manufacturing, for example, has moved out of um, you know, the expensive Western European countries, and is now in places like Slovakia, Slovenia, where
Hmm.
the Peugeot's factories and places like that, they're building the cars in those countries because they put the investment in. Data centers are a natural next extension to that.
Hmm.
Um, but you don't want to build it too close to the Ukraine border just in case. So I think you've
Right.
got that political sort of scenario, which is, one of the things why people often say to me is, so why is Donald Trump getting involved in the Ukraine war? I'm going, well, because if people want to invest in countries anywhere close to it, they're going to want stability. They're
Mm,
going to want to know that if they're building a 20-year plan to build data centers out in Romania, it's not going to fall under Putin's control in the next 5 years because he suddenly decides to invade it.
mm,
That's why the Americans are involved in what's going on in Ukraine. It's
mm,
to make sure that what ends, ends and makes that part of Europe, which is a really untapped part of Europe,
mm,
open for much more investment and business. So, you know, that's an area I think you can look at. The Nordics is already very well populated with people doing it.
mm,
Um, Outside of that, you're then into just the Western European mature markets where there is still demand because UK, Germany, and France still want investment in their countries, but they
mhm,
may be, they're probably better served with data centers than the likes of Spain.
mm.
So there's probably more opportunity in the likes of Spain and Portugal.
Do you know where they make the most movies in the world right now?
Probably India.
Well, actually, you're probably that's probably true. That could very likely true. So I should probably make sure I got my question better. Here, let me say it differently.
Yeah,
Movies that serve the United States and a Western European office. Do you know where historically it's been Hollywood?
I would have probably gambled at London,
Now it's Atlanta, Georgia.
Atlanta, Georgia.
Surprises the whole world. TV shows, certainly movies that are catering to United States audience. And the reason for that was about 15 years ago, the state of Georgia said, we need a better economic model. We think we got a lot. We got this natural terrain that's really good. We have a economic business environment that is fantastic. We have two oceans that you have easy access to, the Gulf of Mexico, the Atlantic Ocean. We have, in other words, all this topographical stuff. We have the most connected domestic airport, to your point earlier about busyness. So people moving through. So anywhere in the US, North America, nowhere near connected like Heathrow or some other international airports, but a pretty good mix of
Mm.
international connections. So for all of these reasons, and then we're going to build these environments called work, live, play. So when you come to Atlanta and you build your next Marvel movie or any of these other things, we've got entire towns and campuses built where the makeup artist lives and the actors stay temporarily and all these other things. And they're filled with the best grocery stores and parks and whatever. You live here. It's you come, you stay. Many of those families never leave. They stay generationally. Their kids go to local universities or nearby. So all of that environment, and it's for whatever reason, the attraction of leaving California and some of the other traditional places, this is a quality of life. And I imagine the reason why I bring that up is, at least in the States, and I got to believe when I meet other data center developers around the world, here in America, there's an entrepreneurial spirit that we have. Like, okay, so here you've outlined the challenge. We know people need data. You cannot be connected to the modern world if you're not connected to data. And if you're not connected to the modern world, you can never lift yourself or your family out of poverty. It's just the way it is. Modern healthcare, modern banking, modern everything is through these things. So we know there's a need and there's a demand no matter where you are in the world. How do we overcome the obstacles? How do we partner with the locals? How do we partner with that industry? How do we partner with legislatures? How do we figure that out? Not to come in and tell them, but figure out how we partner. The first thing I think, at least in my experience, has been, Roy, is are they eager to do it? Not that it's not hard. Are you eager to do it? Do you see the same thing? Then how do we, in good faith, negotiate together to accomplish it? Because it's good for our citizens, it's good for all these things. And what I've experienced in my limited time in Europe, I think I'm going back in the not too distant future to participate in an event. But my limited time is as I'm meeting them, there are parts of Europe that are saying, we're eager, we're interested, let's figure it out. Yeah, you're right. That's what legislation looks like. You're right. You're right. This is what sustainability looks like and the boundaries that we have to work within. You're right. This is what connectivity are, all these things. But let's find a way and let's get our citizens involved. And when they do that, you can move a 100-year industry like movies from Hollywood to Atlanta or from traditional places. You know, when you were talking about Heathrow and that third runway, I thought to myself, I wonder if we can get some of these gigawatt data center campuses build a runway, or there will be other communities out there that say, hey, why not us? Whether they're in England or they're in some other jurisdiction, say we can get, you know, 2 or 3 runways set up that can receive international traffic much more economically, built to the next 30-year versions of airplanes. Maybe not. No disrespect or shade thrown to the world's busiest international airport, but that's, at least in America, that's how we think about it. Well, how can we? If that port doesn't
Yeah.
want to be the port of the future, is there an opportunity for us? Let's go do it and see if we can attract it.
That's because that was a one big thing that came out of Brussels when I was there is Europe has lots of innovation and lots of really bright ideas, but you don't see many very big European tech firms
Mm,
because those innovators in Europe are bound by rules and regulations. They can't get the investment, they can't grow the company. So they end up moving over to the US
mm,
because it's an entrepreneurial culture. And that's where they grow the companies, and that's how they turn into US giants.
mm,
Because Europe just does not have the incubation and the right processes to grow those small seeds of companies and keep them in Europe and become Europeans. You only have to
mm,
look at, all the companies that have got to a reasonable size that have been acquired and been
mm,
acquired and have been acquired. There is hardly any big tech companies in Europe.
mm,
They are nearly all US owned. Whereas if you look in the data center space, you look at the OT infrastructure, then most of those are European.
mm,
Snyder, French, Eaton's Irish,
mm,
Siemens, German,
mm,
because they've been about for years. They've built their history up for years, and they came from a time when Europe was much more entrepreneurial and not
mm,
so bureaucratic. But they lost that. The
mm,
US gained it. The
mm.
US expanded. What you're seeing is Asia is copying the US to a certain extent, and
Sure,
China's definitely copying it to expand. And
sure.
Europe is going, oh, if we don't do something, we're going to get lost. And that's where we are in Europe. We have the ideas, but the people always move to where the money is and where the support is to grow that company.
I think as we talk about these things, because the data center is just the envelope that the things that represent the ideas of the whole world go into, whatever that is. The looking up the instructions for you to put your grandson's radio in his vehicle so that he can go do his thing, those live in a data center somewhere, or at least the
Yeah.
original diagram that they made to print the booklet that you're using if you're using it or whatever. But that's true.
So strangely enough, it actually came with a CD with the
That's very
documentation on
yeah,
it,
yeah.
which
Well,
I haven't got a
yeah,
laptop with a CD
I
player.
tell you.
So I had to go onto the internet and find a copy of the
Yeah,
instruction
a
manual of
hundred
it.
percent true. Um, I'll go way sideways, and we're about out of time. But my
Yeah,
point just there is that emotion when I look at the people that I love, and I want to see grandkids, and I want to see these other things, and I want to have these experiences with people that I love, at least to the degree that it's within my control. I will change where in the past I might have thought about changing, but I wasn't as motivated to change. My hope is, because it does lead to human flourishing, that the communities that you're such an expert on and we've got to talk about today, that will continue to evolve in fits and starts. It's difficult for us to change our personal behaviors and our, there these processes and procedures has served us in many cases so brilliantly, and they were created for decades, if not centuries, because they were created where there wasn't any process and procedure and it was chaos and people were taken advantage of. But I just do believe, at least as an organization, we believe that, man, if we approach it like that, how can we collaborate and work together? It will, just like we do in the States. It may not work everywhere. There are some communities that say, absolutely not. I don't care how green that energy is. I don't care how whatever it is. It will never happen here. Okay. We'll just move on. We're not going to argue. We'll just move on to the next thing and do it there. but there will be people that say, we got to do something different. There's an opportunity here. How do we embrace it? And I think that's the opportunity. At least that's until I experience it differently. That's what I believe is going to happen.
No, I think you're right. I think the world is it's not just Europe and America. I think there is a big, vast, underserved part of the world, particularly in Africa and Latin America,
Hmm.
where there is a need for this investment, but they haven't got the infrastructure to support it yet.
Hmm.
But with the advent of, the satellite communications, the modular data centers, renewable energy, it's now much more likely that you can drop a modular data center into an African country, connect it up on, okay, not the world's fastest connection, connect it and power it and provide that country with, um, you know, access to the technology so they can start to grow their economy and change their economies. Because
Yeah.
I think that for me is where I see all this going. Yes, we're building lots of stuff and we're arguing over puts it here, who puts it there, but ultimately it's serving, the whole world because what it will do is spill out into the third world. It will start to develop the third world in better ways for them to evolve themselves without probably having to go through all the scars that the Western world have gone through in digging things up and burning coal and doing all that manner of stuff and destroying the atmosphere. They'll be able to adopt this in a much cleaner, greener way and start
Hmm.
to build their economies based on a completely different model to how we built our economies 100, 200 years ago. So I think, data centers to me just represent an evolution of the factory.
Hmm.
And it's, what we're expecting today. It's how we're doing it today. And I was on a call with, I think it was HPE the other week. Um, and they were asked, it wasn't me, it was Larry that asked them the question about what they were looking at further ahead. And he was talking about underwater data centers.
Oh, yeah.
Um, and I added in the fact that, well, actually, I think the next place for investment is space data
Mm.
centers. Not on the moon, as somebody took the wrong way. I was meaning in satellites,
Mm.
geospatial, you know, like the space station. You put something up that can sit up in space. The
Hmm.
temperature is cooler, it's controlled, and there's probably no corrosion. You can put data center up there and connect it back. You could start to see that. And with Amazon and Elon Musk and AWS all invested in this sort of area, it's not
Hmm.
going to be that long before we start to see the first orbiting data center. You
That's
know,
right. It's
I
right.
think that's probably in the next 10 years. You will see a data center orbiting the Earth.
Yeah. Sebastian Moss was writing about that in an earlier article in DCD, and Microsoft has put one under the ocean, not just cooled by the ocean, but powered by the tides that were coming and going. And so we're going to, that's our nature as humans. We're going to keep exploring these things. And to your point earlier, whether it's Africa or parts of the middle of America or Lord knows where, a third of the world's not connected to the internet. Half
Yeah.
of the world is not connected to broadband. If you could just get 4G to the world, there's so many opportunities to educate yourself, to do these things. We could do this all day. Unfortunately, the internet is not going to let us do it all day.
No,
Roy, thank you so much for coming on the show. And I cannot wait till our next conversation. I was looking at my list I said, just keep it down to like 10 or 11 things. I think we checked off 3 of the list. So,
probably. I did have the list up earlier and then it disappeared with other emails filing. But no, I'm more than happy to join in any conversation and stuff. And as you know, as you probably discovered, I can talk for Britain on quite a broad range of topics because, you know, I'm slightly older than you. I'm 68 this year, so I'm sort of um, looking at this and going, I'm probably going to retire in about 2 or 3 years' time.
mm,
Because we were having a conversation that the other chief analyst
uh-huh.
when we were on a team call, and I don't know if I told you we were talking about programming because they were
Mm.
talking about VBA. And we're going, well, you do realize when I started programming, I wrote it down on a coding sheet, handed that to a typist to punch cards, took those cards and loaded them into a computer. And then the next morning went to the printer to get my printout, only to realize I'd made a mistake at line 2. And I had to go back through the whole process again.
Right.
And they went, what? I went, that's how I started programming.
Yeah.
And now I am old, yeah, but I'm still alive and I'm still working in this industry. And I
Right.
started programming like that. So, that's how
Right.
fast, when you look back, things have moved.
Yeah.
So, my grandson today, in 30 years' time, when he looks back, it'll be, yeah, we used to drive cars and press buttons to get
Right.
radios to work.
He would say coding. What's coding? You just say computer. I need
Yeah.
a right. That's what you need. Well,
So,
well.
anyways,
Thanks for
good
joining me
speaking to you,
today.
David. That's
My great
excellent.
pleasure.
And if you need anything else, you know where I am.
I
So,
do. Hey, if you like that conversation with Roy and I, hit the like button. And if you loved it, hit the subscribe button. We'll see you next time, everybody. Have a good day.